issue. And so one of the very first moments of epiphany that I realized that astrology is deeply feminist is because it's only presented to women. And in its own way, it then becomes almost like a women's care or women's interest or women's issue eventually. And then it's like, why is that? Astrology in its very early history was only to be learned by men.
Hi, Babs. Welcome to the Highly Spiritual Person podcast. How are you?
Hi, Camille. I'm so happy to be here. I'm really, really pumped.
I am so pumped to have you. So when I found your work, the thing that really struck me, the thing that really I found so interesting about your work is that, yes, it's astrology, but you have all of these different perspectives and these very specific things that you get into. I saw that you mentioned feminism. I saw that you had kind of these quarterly reports. I saw that you're talking about pop astrology's most gate kept secret. You had all of these things that were pulling me in that I said, okay, I don't know a ton about astrology, but I need to learn more. But before we get into all of that, I really want to start with the basics of just like, where did all this begin? What was your childhood like? Did you grow up with astrology? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
No, I mean, you can tell from my laugh, far from it. No.
Yeah.
So something that is pretty popular knowledge, at least within the people who know me, is that I actually grew up Catholic.
Mm-hmm.
And I always joke that the quickest way to make a witch is to force her to be Catholic. And but kind of like to journey back to being 11 years old and just having so many questions about why there weren't larger roles in the Bible for women.
Mm-hmm.
Because it seemed to be the dichotomy seemed to be you can either be a virgin mother and
Mm-hmm.
chosen by God, or you can be a whore chosen
Mm-hmm.
by Jesus and whichever else. And
Yeah.
those two options weren't the best considering
Yeah.
other things. So I truly was questioning the Bible a lot, and it landed me in detention. And yeah, and the good part about this is that the detention was an office, and the office had a computer. And to date myself, these computers were old. They didn't have passwords yet.
So you just had an unrestricted computer in detention.
That had internet. I mean, it was like
Wow.
very slow dial-up like internet.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I was like searching. I was like, okay, what's the thing that I can get away with that's so like, heathenous, and being a young girl, obviously I'm not going to look up what like a young boy might look up, but I'd look up the next best thing, which is astrology. So
I'm assuming this is a Catholic school if you were getting in trouble for questioning the Bible.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then it became addicting a bit because I'd be like, well, detention's over. Now I have to go home, and like I can't look this stuff up at home. So what do? Get in trouble. Go back to detention.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you were purposefully getting in trouble so that you'd be able to access the unrestricted computer in the detention room so that you could look up astrology. And apparently nobody's checking the history on this computer.
Because I think, I don't even know if computers had that. I don't know.
Yeah, I can't remember.
There was the analytics. I don't remember if you were able to go into the history, or like I just remember being like very stealthy about it.
Yeah.
And whenever I was like, I would really like to go look up something, I'd be like, so if Adam and Eve, I would just bring up any crazy question, and they'd be like, go to detention. I'm like, okay.
Wow. What a phenomenal workaround to be able to look into astrology. So were there a lot of websites on astrology at this time? Were you able to get in-depth information?
Not really. At the time, because the internet was still fairly new, the only place that had birthed internet astrology was Astrology Zone, which was run by Susan Miller, who is like the mother of
I've heard her name.
Internet astrology. And so if it wasn't for her site, I don't think I would have, known as much. But I think that it was just about like looking into esoteric philosophies more so. And that touched tangentially on astrology. But at the time, I wasn't looking into like, what does this sign mean? What does that sign mean? It was more
Sure.
like, what is out there beyond what I'm being told in school.
Right. I mean, those are really big questions to be asking as, you know, a young person, and especially as a young person at a Catholic school. So I'm assuming your family was also probably very against astrology. Did you kind of have to stay in the astrology closet for a long time?
Yeah, oddly enough, I did. And then when I, spoke about it more and more, my father, who's a physicist, actually said,
Mhm.
well, I also studied astrology, and so did your mother. And
Really?
I was like, really? Like, what? Why did you keep this secret? And they asked, why did you keep the secret? And I said, okay, good point. So it's interesting, though. The astrology that they studied was Chinese astrology, which is very different from the Western tropical astrology that I study.
Sure.
And after a while, though, they both said that, I mean, they're both, my father's a physicist and my mother's a mathematician.
Yeah.
So both of them were like, astrology is fine and all, but the real thing that makes the earth move is science and mathematics.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we don't need astrology anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so my whole thing was this relationship with astrology and being told that it's a thing of the past and that it should be just left in the past and we move on because other disciplines were built on astrology.
Yeah.
That we as people to evolve should elevate and move on from astrology. Meanwhile, I'm just like, but why? There's so much more that astrology has given us. Like, why would you want to forget that and move forward? So it was always a point of like tongue-in-cheek contention almost, but not too far as to say that. It was more so like my dad would say, oh, why are you an astrologer? You could have been a physicist.
But that wasn't your path, right? It wasn't
no,
that.
it
You
wasn't.
didn't have that passion, right, to be a physicist?
Oh my God. And I was so bad at physics. Like, if you ask me to like calculate the torque of something, I'm like, I don't know. Or
yeah.
I don't ask me. Velocity, I don't know. Yeah. So that's
interesting. So you happen to have this commonality with your parents that you all at one point were interested in astrology. They decided to move on from astrology because they found it obsolete. They found that science was a better worldview. So at what point did you start thinking of astrology as a true calling or a true career for you, like something that you could really offer to others?
That's such a great question, and I hope I can answer it in a succinct way because
It's fine if it's winding. Don't worry, don't worry.
There were many moments, really. I could tell you that when I decided to go professional, because you have to understand, I started my journey studying astrology since I was 11, and then I dived and went to the library a bunch, checked out a bunch of esoteric books and all these other things, and really started to build the study up. But it wasn't until 2020 when I decided I wanted to make this a career and also honor my calling. And the way that this came about was pretty much the pandemic. We know it very well. At the start of it, I was just, finishing up like maybe a bunch of events that I had done that I was producing myself because I really thought I want to be an event producer, which is just a really fun, great thing to do. But then the pandemic shut down all events and that went out the window. So then I was at a loss and I was meditating and I was wondering what I should do. And what was presented to me in a download was to make an Excel spreadsheet, which is so bizarre.
You got a download. You got a spiritual download about an Excel spreadsheet. Are you sure you're not actually a scientist? Because I feel like that is something very scientific. Anyway, continue.
I mean, you would think, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like surprised. I was like, oh, that's okay. I'll go do that. I like Excel spreadsheets, sure. Is my Capricorn showing?
Right.
So I sit down and I'm channeling, and it said like the download said you're gonna make 3 columns. The first column is gonna be what it is that you love to do.
Okay.
The second column is what is it that you are good at? Very different.
Yeah.
Very different, right?
Yeah.
And the third column is what are you willing to do for free?
For free.
And I was like, for free? That, that kind of goes against this whole me having to make money to pay bills thing.
Right.
And, the universe laughed at me and said, honey, if you think you're going to make any money in your first 5 years, you are hilarious.
Yeah.
you need to
Yeah.
start thinking about doing things for free.
Yeah.
And so I listed out all these things, and, teaching and educating and talking and speaking and kind of just like writing was a big one. It all was within this, but then I had to think, like, what was the thing that I loved, that I was good at, and I would do for free. And I realized I've been reading my friends' charts for years.
Yeah.
And I've been exploring, astrology with my friends for years, really like bringing them into this fold, this journey. And I realized I've been doing this for free for so long. This must be it, because it checked all the boxes, and then it now allows me to do all the things that I love to do, that I'm good at doing, and that I'm happy to do for free at,
Yeah.
at, with its limitations. But
Yeah, exactly. So do you see, so for you, this is what you feel like you came to this earth to do?
yes,
Yeah.
very much so. It
Yeah.
was, and when I told my dad this, and really I told him that this is what I want to do, and I help people, his tune completely changed. It was like, oh, you also help people. That's something that I, as a physicist, don't necessarily get to witness on a day-to-day. I don't really help people, but I see that what I contribute helps, develop us as like a society. But what you do is pretty damn cool. And I was like, all right.
Have you been able to look at your father's natal chart? Have you been able to give him advice from an astrological perspective? Does he allow that, or is he more just like, oh, it's cool if you're doing that over there?
Yeah, unfortunately, he is. He's very. I think what's the word? It's like him witnessing how I've become as a person is deeply challenging to him and his faith.
Yeah.
Because he'll often say to me, I'll say to him with gratitude, thank you so much for sitting with me and, talking through ideas with me.
Sure.
And all these things. And he'll say, oh, that's quite all right. I just hope I'm not going to hell.
Oh, wow. So there's guilt.
And it used to be deeply disturbing, like the first 2 times that I heard it.
Yeah.
And then it became like a running joke. So because it's the only thing I could do. I can only laugh at it. So it's it definitely presents a challenge. And then in the case of my mother, who's not in the picture, unfortunately, she had abandoned me at 15. And I mean, she presented with narcissism and was just a very abusive and terrible mother. But what I do understand from my research I've done on my family legacy and things like that was that she comes from a lineage of women who never wanted to be mothers.
Yeah.
So when I kind of put that into perspective, it doesn't excuse her behavior, but it does contextualize what was going on during that time.
Yeah.
And so to kind of go back to all these little moments when astrology, quite frankly, showed me the path to healing, this is one of the really pivotal moments.
Yeah.
Where it was very evident that a lot of the relationships that I saw in other people that were also abusive was a reflection of the very first relationship that I had with my mother. And then through therapy and then having astrology alongside specifically themes of Chiron, I was able to almost exponentially expedite the healing and understanding and the processing process.
Yeah. I first of all, I really appreciate you sharing. That's a huge thing to have to say out loud. And I can't imagine just what you've gone through, like you said, in the path to healing. And one thing I wanted to highlight is that I don't know if people really consider or even think about astrology as a way to heal. You mentioned astrology alongside therapy and other personal work. I would just love a little bit more of your perspective around that, around how astrology can be used for healing. And then I think we should dive into some of the astrology right now.
Yeah, sure. I always think that first and foremost, when people learn about astrology, they have to understand that it is a study of self-awareness first.
Yeah.
So, and that shares a similar goal, I'd say, with therapy as well. Because when you're in therapy, if you have a good therapist, they'll often say, listen, I don't want you to be with me long term or for a lifetime. I would like for you to learn these skills so that eventually you can cope with life without me and you'll be better off and you don't need me anymore.
Exactly.
And if we look at astrology and tarot and all these different modalities that really help us understand ourselves and self-recognize and almost like be completely aware of all the things that have happened to us,
Mm-hmm.
maybe reframe it to for us and all these things,
Mm-hmm.
what it does, it expands our mind about how things happened, how the context really does shine a light to what was happening, the why, maybe the purpose, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And through that is just this personal growth that I think we're all after. We just might not, say the words out
Yeah.
loud, but I
Yeah.
do think that as human beings, one of the most like esoteric philosophies is that we're humans and we are different from animals because we constantly need to grow and we want to grow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so when I look at how astrology was helping me in tandem with therapy at the time when I was going through like such a difficult time, I just had gone through a breakup with a narcissist.
Mm-hmm.
And I was realizing like, wow, there's so many parallels between he and my mother and like the way I recognize love and, the fine line between love and abuse, because if you're raised in an abusive household, you're going to think that all love is conditional and that you must meet standards in order to attain and keep the love.
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, that's not how love works at all. It's unconditional, and that's the most beautiful part about love. It's like it comes from source and it's unlimited.
Yeah.
And so to be able to recognize that that's like my reality is not reality was such a, this is the type of thing that I think could drive a lot of people crazy, where it's like suddenly what they perceive as reality is not real at all. I think that would shatter a lot of people. And in a lot of ways it did for me, at least my emotional world. And then in order to rebuild it, that's where astrology's piece really helped me understand, like, this is not the world. You're rebuilding a new world. You're trying new things. You're exploring new things. And these are all the transits that support you. Here are some ones that don't, but that's okay. We're going to get it through. And then again, having that piece with therapy as well was just tremendously helpful.
Yeah, that is beautiful. And I know I said we would dive right into the current astrology, but I from what you were saying, I realized I had another question here. So talking about the nature of reality, because it sounds like you definitely dive into the esoteric, which I love. I love when people can go to these deep places. I would love a little bit more of your perspective on the nature of reality. When you said, when people realize that the reality out there is not always, that isn't actually reality. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Of like, do you, for instance, see the exterior as just a mirror of the interior, or do you see reality as an illusion? What is reality to you?
I've never been asked this question. Wow. Okay. I gotta take a moment. I love this.
I know, it's
I love
okay.
it.
It's okay. Yeah.
I'm loving this. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's see. I would say that I do think that reality tends to reflect how we're feeling about ourselves internally.
Yeah.
I only know that because, for example, if I'm having a day where I wake up and I just feel really moody and like really shitty and just like, I don't feel good within myself, I will think that so many other people don't feel good about me as well.
Right.
I will think that I will be as irritable, they will be irritable. So it's just like a nonstop. And the next thing you know, everyone that you interact with has a bad day. And you're thinking, why is everyone shitty? And you realize, oh, wait, I'm also kind of shitty.
It's me.
It's me. Oh, no. It's me.
Oops.
Just why that like Taylor Swift song was like so relatable to so many people. So I do think that that's where I would lead first with what is reality. First, it comes from a frame of reference, which is our existence.
Yeah.
And if we're not okay with ourselves, then we're not going to be okay with what we're receiving from others.
Yeah.
That's the one piece. The second piece is your reality is definitely also your environment. So if you're in an environment that's hostile and, I don't know how else to explain it. It's just hostile and it goes against you. It goes against your beliefs. It goes against everything that you stand for. That reality is going to suck. Just plainly.
Right. Yeah.
And it doesn't, and that only just kind of feeds more into the whole, I don't feel good about myself. I don't feel safe here to be who I am. And then that just is, again, a reflection furthermore about your environment and how it's reflecting around you. So I would say it's I guess the one answer. It's definitely yourself, and then your reality is whatever is reflected based on how you feel about yourself.
Yeah. That I love that. And I love that, you know, it's both the internal and the external, and that you probably need to deal with both at some point. You need to deal with the internal and you need to deal with what's around you.
This is barring, however, there's certainly exceptions. The exceptions are war. If you're in a war zone,
Right.
or if you're dying from a chronic disease, chronic disease, then that's different. That's definitely circumstance. That is a horrific circumstance that you're in, that no amount of mindset will change that circumstance. The best way is to remove yourself from that situation, which is why, like, I wanted to touch on that environment piece. But if you have nowhere to go, then that is just a terrible thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I feel like there's some really good conversations happening right now in the spirituality sphere about reality creation and manifestation. And I feel like that is the missing piece, that people forget that sometimes you are in a situation that is of no fault to your own. You know, if we have privilege, as a lot of us do in the Western world, to be able to move. If I want to buy a new house tomorrow, I can move to a different state. There are people living in situations where something horrific is happening around them and they don't have that mobility. And that isn't an issue of their mindset. That isn't an issue that they weren't thinking the right thoughts or the right affirmations. We do live in a realm where bad things happen, at least in my opinion and my belief, that sometimes bad things happen. And, you know, the rest of us, I think, have the responsibility to try to make things better for people who can't, in my opinion. I will get down from my soapbox, though. I just wanted to point out that I thought that was a great point.
Yes,
I just wanted to say that.
Whoa.
Awesome. So with that, I think we should talk about some current astrology. This is coming out on January 29th, 2024. So we could talk about current astrology, and you have so many great offerings. That's why I keep looking over at my iPad here, because I want to make sure we touch on these. But maybe should we touch on just what's going on right now astrologically?
Yeah, I'd love to. So right now at the current time that we're recording, it's still technically Mercury retrograde period. And I don't know if you're familiar.
No, Mercury retro shade. I thought all I had to worry about was Mercury retro. And I have another thing to worry about. Okay, you have to tell me what this is. Yeah,
not even. Take out the word worry. It's not even a problem.
Okay.
So there was retrograde, and retrograde motion is when, the way that I explain it is different from other astrologers, but the way I explain it is through an ephemeris. So an ephemeris is a tool that astrologers use, or anyone can use, that has every single transit of the planets written down from, like, it's data taken from, like, as far as 2,000 years ago, and has data all the way to 2,000 years in the future. So it's a vast table.
Is this the chart? Oh my god.
Yeah.
Okay, so this looks intimidating. I'm already wow. Okay, go for it.
So I have it pulled up just for the year 2024 because it's relevant.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can go into further back. They actually have volumes. They have books. So back in the day, before software existed, there was the ephemeris. And the idea was that you could draw a horoscope or an astrology birth chart from scratch.
Yeah.
And I've done it once, and the math is insane because it's time math, and time math gets really fucky.
Yeah, I would imagine. Yeah. I mean, just look at
wow. God is blessed. The idea. Yes. So the ephemeris was a way for us to say, let's say a baby was born on January 1st, 2024.
Okay.
We would know that baby has 10 degrees Capricorn of a sun. So it'd have a sun sign of 10 degrees. It would have a moon sign of 6 degrees Virgo. It'd have a Mercury that's retrograde, 22 degrees Sagittarius, and on and on and on. And so as an astrologer, I'd be able to make, like, that circle chart, divvy up the lines, and then place these different, I call them toppings at this point because it's like a pizza pie, little toppings onto the wheel itself. And so, that would give you a rough estimate of what the chart is, but we wouldn't have an accurate chart without an accurate birth time. Because the birth time is what sets up the chart's timing. Yeah. So, and then that's where the time math comes in. It's a huge headache. But
wow.
we have software now, so we don't have to worry about that.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
Yes. So anyway, this is an ephemeris. And so what happens is that we have all these different markings, and we have Mercury. This is the sign for Mercury. It's the female sign with the two horns. That's Mercury.
Got it. Got it.
And if there's here, like it says 22 degrees R, that means it's retrograde. And then on the 2nd, it went direct. Now, the thing is, there's the retro shade period, and retro shade periods last usually 10 days before and 10 days after every retrograde.
Wow. Okay.
And this retro shade period is specifically affecting sensitive populations or sensitive groups, as they call them.
Love that journey for us. Okay.
And so sensitive populations or sensitive groups are people who have either Gemini rising or Virgo rising, people who have Gemini or Virgo sun or moons, or people with Gemini or Virgo stelliums, meaning they have 4 or more planets.
Oh, I have a Gemini stellium.
Oh,
and
okay.
my moon, hold on, my rising is Aries. Yeah, my moon is in Gemini. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you're definitely part of the sensitive groups. Yeah, Mercury retrograde sensitive groups.
Great.
Now, so the thing is that it might be that for you, retrograde might start, for this year, if I could pull up, I'm not going to, but if I pulled up 2023, I already know by heart that Mercury retrograde began December 14th. But you probably felt the effects of it as early as December 4th.
Wow. So I get another 20 days, 10 on each side of Mercury retrograde goodness, it sounds like.
Yes. But what makes this retrograde that we just have even more kind of spectacular is that it was a very short Mercury retrograde. It was just 2 weeks. And usually Mercury retrogrades are about 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Give or take, maybe 5. And so for it to be so short is remarkable, because it means that the retro shade is actually twice as long.
Wow. Great.
So we actually don't end retro shade until we would end retro shade on if it ended on the 2nd, it went direct on the 2nd, we would, have 10 more days of retro shade. That would be the 12th. But because it lasted very long, it actually becomes the 22nd. So we're actually out of retro shade on the 22nd.
On the 22nd. So what can people, I feel like there's a lot of probably misunderstandings around Mercury retrograde, because I was obviously very fearful of it. What is Mercury? I think we understand what retrograde is, hopefully, but what happens during Mercury retrograde? Like what are we looking at in that time?
So I don't think I actually made it clear on what a retrograde is, but according to the ephemeris, it's when the degrees move backwards. So that's the best way for me to describe it, because there's a visual and it makes more sense than thinking about the theoretical, what happens in the stars and stuff. We don't need to know that. Yeah. So what happens during retrogrades is that there are moments when, let's say, the planets move from let's say 0 degrees to 29 degrees in a specific sign, let's say Gemini, right? Mm-hmm. When it retrogrades, it's going backwards to a few degrees backwards. So it goes from 29 degrees Gemini and it goes backwards all the way to 7, let's say. Mm-hmm. So what's happening is that it's kind of revisiting the things that you just went through.
Yeah.
And so when you think about what is the best thing to do during Mercury retrograde, and actually a time that I find really enjoyable, is you need to look into what you suck at and get better at it.
Interesting. It's an opportunity to upskill?
Yeah. It's the best. When I tell you, and it's so interesting, I have a survival guide on Mercury retrograde that I update every year, so I'll have that available for everyone who follows here.
Yeah.
But the best thing to do is to take the opportunity to reframe and just audit the shit out of your life.
Yeah.
And of course there's going to be clues, some things will be more favorable than others. For example, if it was let's say, I think it was in Sagittarius. Yeah, it was in Sagittarius and Capricorn this past one. So Capricorn was about replanning things or reorienting your goals. And then as it went back into Sagittarius, it was about repicturing the big picture.
Yeah.
And so a lot of people who had new plans and were making new plans for the new year, so many of their plans backfired because they were making plans from a state of duress almost, because they're needing to engage with what they had previously done. But if they didn't factor that in and they were only focusing on the new, it was going to be sabotaged.
Interesting. So, okay, the level of depth that you're bringing to this is really great, because I feel like for most of us who are in the spiritual community who have heard of Mercury retrograde, all we hear is your ex is going to call you, don't sign any new contracts, don't, start a new job, or, sign up for a new job or anything like that. That's really, or like your cell phone might not work. Those are the only things that we're hearing. Do you think those things are also true? Like, are those things we should think about?
So I think it's better to think about why it is that these things are symptoms of what's actually happening, of the quote unquote disease. And so when we talk about technological glitches, or like people misremembering or misunderstanding what you're saying, or communication glitches, things like that, I think what needs to kind of refocus and retool here is that Mercury retrograde is a time to redo the things that we're bad at. So if people are pretty bad at communication in general, it's going to highlight that. I think of Mercury retrograde energy as like a cat that's just exposing all the things that you didn't properly pin down on your desk that's really important. So if you have like a prized vase from your great grandmother and you didn't secure that down, guess what? That cat is throwing that shit on the ground and it's going to shatter. And the idea is like this like energy, this disruptive energy is here to point at the glaring things you let slide because life is busy. And so these are great opportunities to really slow down and embrace the fact that, oh, maybe I should refortify my desk. Maybe I should reorganize. The trick to really embracing the transit, because it shows up every 3 to 4 years, it's very much part of our life, is that you really need to look at the things that have been neglected and then bring attention to that. So you're like readjusting, or you're reorganizing, or reallocating. That's my favorite word. You're reallocating money, you're reallocating attention, you're reallocating time to all these things that otherwise would have been left to the wayside. And just another note, 40% of the population was actually born during a Mercury retrograde, because that is how often we have retrogrades, Mercury retrogrades specifically. And if you're born during a time of Mercury retrograde, you are actually kicking so much butt during Mercury retrograde, because when this is happening, life finally makes sense. And you get to move forward and you have no issue. And there's so many people that I know, also businesses that I know, who started their business during a Mercury retrograde. That's their time to shine. Like they get so many things done. They push through, they launch successfully. Like, so I think it really depends on, if we're looking at like the really minute details of it all, it truly depends on the chart itself. But for the most part, I really hate when people are like, oh my God, we have to defer Mercury retrograde. It's like, no, this is the best time to just like experiment and get good at things you're horrible at. And I for one am really bad at traveling. Like I don't get it. It's very stress inducing. And during one of the Mercury retrogrades of Gemini about 2 years ago, I was like, I'm going to get really good at this one specific type of trip, because I was nonstop traveling in and out of the new train station in New York. And the first time, bombed it. I nearly missed my train. It was horrible. By the 5th time, though, I was a boss. I knew where to sit. I knew where to stand. I knew people by name.
Hey, Jim. Good to see you again.
It was really the same people. I'd be like, yep, it's me again. And they're like, that's Babs.
I love that.
And I just got good at it. And that's the thing. That's the beauty of Mercury retrograde. And that's a skill I can now carry on. Like, I understand now.
I love that. And earlier you used the word disruption, which I'm kind of noticing as a pattern with some of your offerings and areas that you're willing to go through, I think are areas that people feel are disruptive. I want to get to talk about Saturn return in a second, but one thing I did want to ask that just came up as you were talking about retrogrades. A lot of people mention 2023 and 2024 as just a year of a lot of retrogrades in all the planets. Do you find it important for people to know, okay, my Venus is going retrograde at this point, Jupiter? Do you follow all the retrogrades, or do you find that it's only really valuable to just look at Mercury retrograde?
So let's see. Again, not a question I've been asked before, so I have to think about this.
It just came up. I was like, I have to ask.
I love how your mind thinks. Okay.
Yeah.
I would say that the reason why we look at Mercury retrograde so much is because it's a personal planet that moves incredibly quickly.
Got it. Yeah.
We're talking like a matter of days. It just zooms by. And so when we feel the shift, it's such a sharp pivot that we all feel it. We're like, oh, okay. Like you hear the brake screech, kind of thing. Whereas like things like Venus retrograde, they can last like, this most recent one I think lasted like 2 months maybe. It was like it happened in Leo. So when it slows down, it like really slows down, but it's so minimal that you're like, And then it's more like when you have like a frog in boiling water.
Yeah.
If you slowly raise the heat, that's kind of what those are like.
It's subtle.
And that's similar to the Mars retrograde as well. And so those kind of finished off the personal planets. So I would say yes, it's good to look into those personal planets. Again, like those personal planets being the sun, the moon, Mercury, Venus, and Mars. I don't know if I'm missing one. Probably not. No. And then for the outer planets, those are more of a generational thing. So they're very long term. It's difficult to really feel it personally unless you have a chart that's getting activated by a specific retrograde. But that's a very advanced topic.
Right.
I would say for the most part, if you feel like there's something that's been going on for a period of time, that's when you would want to look at the outer planets and see what's going on. We're talking like 7 years.
Sure.
Like if you're thinking, oh my God, the last 7 years have been really hard. I've been really put through it. What the hell was going on? Or what the fuck was going on? Which is a reading I do offer. Then in that case, I would definitely, as your astrologer, I would look at the outer planets to be like, okay, this is a large swath of your life. Let's figure out what's going on there.
That makes sense. And I guess that's a perfect segue into talking about Saturn returns, because one of your offerings is what the fuck is going on with Saturn returns. And Saturn is an outer planet, but I think a lot of people, if you know a little bit about astrology, that's another area that we're supposed to kind of fear. Some people would say fear is the Saturn return. So what is the Saturn return, and is it something that we should be fearing?
So I don't think we should be fearing any type of transit, any type of astrological like thing that's put out there, especially in mainstream media, because it is usually used in a way to market to you, and it's weaponized, and it's always going to try to sell you something. And I don't think that that's appropriate. I think that astrology is here to empower us. So my answer would be that the Saturn return happens every 30 or so years. So you have it around 30. It could be as early as 27, depending on where Saturn is in your chart. And then it lasts about 2.5 years. And then you have 1 year where you recover and you're like, wow, what the hell was that? And then you move on with your life. And then you do it again at 60. And then if you're lucky, you do it again at 90. And the way that I've understood the Saturn return also came from a download. It was simply two questions. One's a follow-up question of the other, depending on like the choose your own adventure type model. And can I ask, are you 30 or have you passed 30?
I'm 35.
Okay, you've passed it. Okay, great.
Yeah, I survived.
Fantastic. Woo, me too. Okay. So I would have asked you at like, let's say 28 or 29 when it was starting, let's say. I would have said, Camille, tell me honestly, are you happy with your life?
And I would have said no. I would have absolutely said no at that time at 28. I would have said, no, I am not. Yep.
Yeah. And so the follow-up question then becomes, what are you going to do about it?
Well, if I think back to what I did, I made a ton of changes and there was a ton of chaos. And then I came out the other side of it around, I would say 30, 31, 32. So yeah.
Yeah. And so constantly the universe, the challenges, the constant reframing are always going to ask these two questions. Are you happy now? Are you happy now? Are you happy now? If the answer is no, like flat out no. Or, I'm happy that you actually admitted that it's a flat out no. There's so many people that I know, they're like, well, I'm grateful for it. No. If it's not a fuck yes, then it's a hell no.
Exactly.
So like, don't try to, no, we're not, none of that. No, I'm asking an honest question. And so if the answer though, because again, you're asked this question at 60, if the question is then, are you happy with your life? And usually the answer is yes. Or like, I've made pretty good strides, Then, or even at 90, you say, I had a really good life, we should hope, right? Then the question becomes, how are you going to give back?
Yeah.
And
Wow.
that's all Saturn return is.
Really? So let's dive into that a little bit more, because these are like new perspectives. I have been familiar with these things, but never from this angle. So why is that a question about giving back when in connection to Saturn? What is it about Saturn where that question would be relevant?
Yeah. So it really boils down to what the Saturn archetype represents. And in this
Yeah.
case, it's about the teacher. But
Yeah.
it's not the teacher that coddles you and gives you like a gold star for nothing. It's
Hmm.
the coach that says to you, you have two more laps in you when you're dying and throwing up
Yeah.
into the garbage can. But it's the
Yeah.
coach saying, no, you got two more laps in you. I know you do.
Yeah.
And you run two more laps, you're dying, you're really like dragging in the very, very last like 500 meters.
Yeah.
And then you do it, and then they just nod at you, and that's it. They
Yeah.
don't even say good job. They just say, yeah, I told you, you had two more laps in you. But then what
Wow.
happens is that the next time you run, you can run two more laps than the other person because you persevered to run two more laps and you listened to Saturn in that way.
Yeah.
So the gift of Saturn is discipline.
Hmm.
And it's this restriction and this harshness that again, like it is not at all balanced, and it's not the only way. This like tough love is definitely not the only way. But when you're going through these moments of your Saturn return being asked, are you happy? You have two more laps in you. I know you do. Stuff like that. When you're going through that,
Hmm.
what happens is that eventually you get the fruits of your labor, and that'll happen later in life, 60 if you make it, 90 if you make it. And at
Yeah.
that point, when you've made it and you have you've accumulated all these laps, all these medals, all these things that show that you really put in the work, suddenly it's like, great, you've become this mentor figure.
Right. Right.
How would you want to give back? How maybe you won't
Yeah.
be the hard ass teacher that you grew up with. Maybe you'll be more of a
Yeah.
balanced teacher. But at the very least, all the things that you've accumulated, these are resources. And, these can be, given back energetically to usher in the new people.
Yeah.
And that's where the whole like mentorship comes in. So Saturn has both the teacher, the coach, and the mentor. That's the three
Yeah.
phases.
Yeah. Beautiful. I love that there's this kind of like the student becoming the teacher potential arc that we can go down. I love that. This is really changing my entire perspective on astrology. I love this. And I know we're starting to get close to time, so I want to make sure we get into some of these other offerings, but I do want to talk about astrology and feminism. I've never seen somebody really succinctly connect these two. I feel like there's a lot of women who are into astrology, but we don't think about feminism and astrology. Can you just tell me more about your perspective here?
Yeah. So I always love to open up people's minds with questions, as you can
Yeah.
tell.
Yes. Yes.
So I would say, like, Camille, tell me, think of all the magazines that you've seen astrology columns in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cosmo.
Now
Yeah.
name the ones that are men centered or male for the male audience.
Probably none of them, because it's
Yeah.
what Cosmo and I mean, there's probably one in Women's World. Yeah. There's probably maybe a little one in Home and Garden. They're all basically women's magazines. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of an issue, right? I think
Yeah.
that's pretty much a glaring issue. And so one of the very first moments of epiphany that I realized that astrology is deeply feminist is because it's only presented to women.
Mm-hmm.
And in its own way, it then becomes almost like a women's care or women's interest or women's issue eventually. And then it's like, why is that?
Yeah.
Astrology in its very early history was only to be learned by men because, well, women weren't educated. So,
Right.
And so when I look back at the history of astrology, it was actually supported by patriarchy until the moment that astrology began awakening other people to think for themselves through the self-awareness piece that we spoke about at the beginning of this podcast.
Yeah.
And so as soon as that happened, plutocracies like patriarchy and even the Catholic Church were like, oh, hell no, we can't have people thinking for themselves. No, that's not how we want to work.
Right.
So then the best way to condemn astrology was to make it deeply feminine by condemning it to witchcraft or spirituality or, just the worst of the worst, like heathens and, other things.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, later on, as, patriarchy develops, capitalism came into play.
Yeah.
And I do think, and like this is how I play it out in my mind, I feel like capitalism and like patriarchy were on the golf course and they were saying, you know, sales are kind of down. I don't know, like the women just don't want to buy anymore. Like they're just not buying anything, and I don't know what to do with the women. And patriarchy's like, you know, we should really like dust off astrology and like include her into the fold again.
Yeah.
And then like, you know, just like use the knowledge and like repackage it and then weaponize it and turn it into ads and then have people buy stuff again.
Yeah.
And that's what happened. And so if you look at the problem I have with mainstream astrology and pop astrology is that it's always used to sell something to somebody from a place of fear or inadequacy. Yeah. So I remember the Cosmopolitan, you know, the Cosmo Girl like quizzes would be like, oh, what kind of flirt are you or something? And it'd be like, oh, you're a Gemini, you're flirting with everybody. That's how you make people jealous, blah, 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 right? Make him more jealous by purchasing this eyeliner.
Wow.
Or wear this thing to represent Taurus. Yeah. Or like, here's merchandise to, you know, bring out the Cancer babe in you or something like that.
Right.
As I noticed more and more of this, I was like, wow, this is truly weaponized because you're taking something that people love and then you're using it against them to make them buy stuff that they don't need.
Yeah.
And so that became deeply, not deeply and also incredibly overwhelming in this understanding that astrology and feminism are so deeply connected, because astrology and the simple act of learning more about yourself, the simple act of becoming more self-aware and, you know, discovering parts of yourself is going against patriarchy. And astrology does this on a very large scale for many people, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah. So many great points here. I think the first thing that I would say is when I think back to my childhood, I know you said you grew up in a Catholic home or, you know, in a Catholic school. I grew up in a Christian home. Astrology was seen as something that was very fringe and extremely niche. I didn't know a lot of people that were into astrology. And then at some point in my late 20s, 30s, it seemed like astrology was everywhere, and it was marketed, like you said, in this kind of pop astrology way, and it was marketed to women. It would always be these like pink motifs, find out, you know, like you said, the flirty flirt thing, and it was boiled down to these kind of stereotypes, and especially if you're a woman, it was even worse. I'm very interested in your perspective that astrology can be used for self-development, and that seems to be kind of almost anti-establishment. And if I'm hearing this correctly, if people knew more that they could use this as deep self-development without having to buy a tote bag that has their sun sign constellation on it, right? They could actually use this for self-development. That could actually help in taking down the patriarchy. That might be a bit of a stretch. No, I know but that's kind of what I'm hearing. I just want to make sure that I'm kind of connecting the dots correctly in everything that you're saying.
Yes, and I'm glad that was the conclusion you made, because that was my mission.
Yeah, no, that's what I heard. I heard take down the patriarchy through self-development. I mean, I think all self-development can help us, you know, for lack of a better term, escape the matrix and take down, you know, some of the systems that are more oppressive. But I'm very much appreciative that you are calling out some of the ways that we're kind of being marketed to, and where astrology is kind of used against us, especially as women. To that point, I want to dig into this a little bit more. I've met a few men who are into astrology, but not a ton. Do you think that there is space for more men to be into astrology?
Yes, absolutely. And so this is one of the very first challenges that I gave myself when I was really developing how astrology is truly, truly deeply feminist.
Yeah.
And it's simply that feminism shouldn't exclude men. Right. Feminists do not hate men. That is exactly a misconception, you know, bridled by people who are pro men, I suppose, or like in those groups.
Yeah.
And so with that, we have to understand that patriarchy hurts everybody, especially men. And it's simply that my understanding of it is that so many men do not need to look at themselves because they're not constantly being told they cannot do things.
Right. Right.
So when I think about like women throughout the years being told, sorry, you can't vote. Okay, now you can vote.
Right.
Sorry, you can't work. Okay, now you can vote. Now you can work. You know, and on and on and on, and all these things, right? I do think that women and the oppressed classes, it's not just women, it's also like persons of color, it's also poverty, it's also, you know, every type of marginalized class, they're going to be oppressed. And this oppression is there's going to be a few of them that think about it and they're like, why are we oppressed? Like, why aren't they oppressed? And then this questioning begins into like critical thinking, and then critical thinking begets into these bigger philosophical ideas, and then eventually movements and activism. And so if you think about how many men you know have actively looked at themselves and asked themselves, are they happy? Do they like the person they are? Do they like the person they're becoming? If any of them have ever asked themselves these questions, I don't think that they've ever been prompted to ask, because life is given to them. Like, you should be happy. Look at what you can, you know, attain. But for those that do look within because they just feel the call to look within, I do think that those men are our allies, and they understand that we live in a very disproportionately unequal world, and that there's also now a fight for equity as well. So all of it. And so there is definitely room for at the table for more men to get into astrology. I think that the whole point is that all persons who find and use astrology, even if you're just casually checking your horoscope, that little thing that you just did, that dismantled patriarchy. Like that right there dismantles patriarchy just a little bit. And it's this small little action, these like micro activism pieces that really bring us to a more sustainable version of taking down a system that seems wildly and like gargantuan, right? But the idea is that I do think that feminism in itself, it was always waves, right? It was like unrelenting waves nonstop. There's 3 of them. Then there's a 4th, and it was like it kind of fell apart because of the pandemic. So, and you know, and all these things. And so I do think that we're kind of over the waves because we're all really tired. And we're all so burnt out. And I know so many feminists. Like I asked all my friends, and I say, you know, 1, are you feminist? Yes. 2, are you burnt out? Yes. Like we don't have, we're tired, right? And so that's why I think that astrology being deeply feminist is just like icing on the cake, because you happen to like astrology, you happen to gravitate toward astrology. Guess what? Using that, checking your horoscope, looking deeper into moon signs, all these other things, all of that dismantles patriarchy.
Wow, mic drop. That's beautiful. No, that was so inspiring. And I think it's inspiring for people, especially women, 100% women who have been maybe laughed at or told that they're being silly by wanting to look into astrology, or saying, oh, that's nothing. Why would you want to look into that? That's ridiculous. Like, no, this is a legitimate path to self-development, self-discovery, and making the world a better and more equal and more just place. And that's never talked about.
it's that. And also, I actually encourage people who feel the discouragement from other people, like, oh, astrology is just woo-woo bullshit. I encourage people to be like, okay, keep thinking that. Like, my favorite thing to say to people is, okay, and then you walk away, and it doesn't matter. And what I like about this concept is that the reason why this is going to work is because patriarchy never takes it seriously. And it's the things that you don't take seriously that are your blind spot. And suddenly, the very thing that you think is not going to be your undoing. We all watched Disney movies. We all watched, you know,
we know how the story ends.
Movies. We know how it goes. If you have a blind spot, you take it. And so I truly think that astrology, and like specifically #astrology, is the Trojan horse that's going to help us really catapult this idea to the masses, and in a way that's going to be flying under the radar and is laughable and dismissible by patriarchy, that they're not going to realize what's happening until it's over.
Ooh,
so let's believe that.
I listen, you've already convinced me now that I need to, number one, learn more about astrology, actually, you know, use your services and actually learn more about myself through this. This is phenomenal. Babs, I could talk to you all day about this. I really hope you end up teaching a class on this one day. I know you said, I think teacher was on your
Yeah.
spiritual download Excel spreadsheet. I kind of feel like you should be teaching about this because this is so rich and so deep and so inspiring. Like I feel like I could run through a wall right now. So
Wow, I need that testimonial.
yeah, I'll make this a clip and you could use this.
Love it. Thank
So
you.
Babs, I want to make sure we end by talking about just everything you offer, because you do have a lot of different ways that you work with people and a lot of different really juicy areas that you can dive into. We talked about, Mercury retrograde, we talked about Saturn returns, but what are the other things, other areas you can help people with?
Yeah, so one of my favorite, and I'm so sorry we didn't get to it, but one of my favorite ways to really help people is to kind of unlock the hack to time, which
Yeah.
is simply it's a program called Planet by the Planets, and
Yeah.
it's a one-to-one service where we basically break down your chart into fiscal quarters, so they're cosmic quarters,
Yeah.
because what people don't know is that your birth chart, especially when you have the birth time, actually gives you an exact date to the calendar year for when your year begins. So, for
Oh.
example, do you know your rising?
Yeah, I'm a Aries rising.
Perfect. Okay,
Yeah.
so for you, your new year begins sometime in Aries season.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't realize that. Okay,
yeah.
cool.
And so I guess the question here is, every year around Aries season, do you feel a little bit more of a renaissance going on, like a rebirth, more active slightly, or
You
just like
know,
clear-headed?
I feel like more, yeah, like I feel energized definitely during that time. I didn't even connect the dots there.
Yeah. So that's
Wow.
the thing. And then as you go on, I mean, you being an Aries rising is helpful because it starts off the zodiac wheel anyway. So it's
Yeah.
like a natural rhythm for you.
Yeah.
And then it happens that basically wherever, and you mentioned you have a Gemini stellium.
Yeah. It's like, oh, I wrote it down at some point. It's Gemini moon. I think my Gemini, Mercury, and Venus. And
Okay.
there might be one more that are all
I'm
in.
sure.
I have a
And
lot. Yeah.
and so it tells me that in Gemini season, you're busy. You're booked and busy.
Wow. I never thought about that.
Yeah. So that's the idea. We
Wow.
break that down. So just like in a very like short example, what'll happen is during this service, we'll break down your chart. We'll identify the busy seasons and your peace times, so
Yeah.
that because a lot of the people that I have found in my research have been people that are like, I'm so stressed. Like there's so many people that want a piece of me. And then I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, this will pass. And then a couple of months later, they'll be like, I'm so stressed. I'm like, why? Nothing's happening. I'm like, you were
Yeah.
stressed before. Like, it's time to take a break. And they're like, what's a break? I don't understand.
Yeah. What is
So,
it?
so that's the thing. This specific service is helpful for this because it really breaks down your peaceful times, meaning this is the time to take a vacation. Like, this is the
Yeah.
time to not worry. This is the time to, like, rest, rejuvenate, to prepare for the next busy time. And what people, and I can't even speak because I'm so excited. Like,
Yeah.
there's so many people who go on vacation and I asked them, how was vacation? And they said, oh my God, my work wouldn't stop bothering me. Or, oh my God,
Oh, yeah.
I couldn't relax because of all these things in my head. And I was like, well, why did you go during your busy time?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wow. So,
Yeah.
God, I could talk to you all day about this. I need that now. Now that I know that that's how things actually function, I need that in my life because I have those cycles and I've never matched them up to my chart.
And
That's
that's the
phenomenal.
beauty of it. That begins the
Yeah.
journey of self-awareness because
Yeah.
suddenly you're like, wait, this is how
Yeah.
it is like almost every year?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Phenomenal. Phenomenal.
Mhm.
Any other services, anything else that you offer that you want to highlight?
I have another service that's specifically for parents. I
Yeah.
noticed that there was a like a gap in the market where no one's supporting parents, which
Yeah.
sucks because
Yeah.
y'all are navigating this shit without any
Oh yeah,
anything.
there's no manual
Yeah.
for this. Yeah.
Unprecedented event after unprecedented event. You
All
have
the time.
no guides.
Yeah.
So I made this was a client-led experience. A lot of my clients had children and they needed to know what the fuck was going on with their kids.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'll help you. So
Yeah.
what this is it's a deep dive into how the dynamic between you and your child works
Yeah.
and how you activate your child and how your child activates you. And it goes into a lot of the parenting that you experienced as a child, according to the birth chart. And seeing as how I am not a parent, it is very crucial that this is a co-working experience, that you're the one that's able to contextualize what's going on in your day-to-day, and that I'm able to then bring in my knowledge through astrology about what's going on. And it's just been monumental for so many people because, and I've also done it with sibling compatibility as well. It's just like, just family dynamics in general, there's just so much going on.
So a lot going on.
Similar to the piece about the planet by the planets is that if you, like, let's say you have do you have children?
I do. I have one. Yeah.
Okay. So let's say your child has, like, you'll actually in this reading understand their busy times and their peace times.
Oh, wow.
So then you can align your schedule to their schedule and then just keep out for certain weird moments. Yeah. And then even if you're lucky, you might have the same peace times and you can go on vacation.
Oof. Knock on everything. Yes, I would love that. Wonderful. Babs, this has been mind-blowing in so many ways. I've learned so much. You are an excellent teacher. Where can people find you and book a reading?
Yeah, so right now my website is down. I think by the time that this is launched, it should be ready to go and we'll have all the links available, but it's
awesome.
Just babscheung.com, my name. But for now, you can look up babscheung.com/discovery quiz. And I actually have a quiz that will help match you to the perfect reading for your situation.
Awesome. That is so great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Highly Spiritual Person podcast. I really hope you found this conversation inspiring and uplifting. If you did, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to our channel for more updates. And remember, sharing is caring, so if you think others would benefit from this content, don't hesitate to share it with your friends and family. We'll be back with more exciting content, so stay tuned and stay curious.